have a background in history. But yeah, I've moved into the edutainment industry, if you can call it that. But yeah, that's me, SophieQuest. And nice to meet you all. And this is such a great cause. Thank you so much for everyone that's currently donated. But yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And this is such a great event. I look forward to it every year. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for being here. I think we can go with Paisley Trees next.
Great. Yes, thank you so much for having me as well. I'm Paisley Trees. I stream. I just started streaming this week, but mostly I make YouTube videos about Civ 6 and now Civ 7. I have a background in art history, specifically architectural history of the Middle East region of West Asia. And I am currently working on my PhD, so it's still a long way to go, but working at it. And I'm really excited to be here today and ask lots of questions.
Right. And Dr. Johnson.
Hey, I'm Andrew Johnson. I'm the senior historian on Civ. Wait, we can say Civ 7 now, right? Yeah. On Civ
Yeah.
7.
Finally.
And,
All those years.
I know, right? You expect I'm working on some history game.
Yeah, some unnamed project for Firaxis that definitely is not a new Civ game.
That's right. Yeah, right. Yeah, and I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm my other life, I teach at Stockholm University in Sweden, and my focus is on Southeast Asia,
Wow.
especially 19th century, but mostly contemporary, Thailand, Laos.
Okay. And so this was kind of billed as like halfway through the Civgive, but this time in Civgive, I have developed some objectives that I call historical objectives. Now, I am an amateur historian, Wikipedia historian, if you will, and I have asked them to come on to either critique or kind of like roast them a little bit, kind of a friendly jabbing at some of the objectives. And I did share with them before, and I know I was a little bit late to that, so I apologize. But if anyone had anything that like kind of stuck out that they wanted to comment on.
Well,
Mm.
I feel like Dr. Johnson, this is your chance to get revenge for all the critiquing we do. It's your chance to give it right back to us.
You guys do critique? Really?
No, never.
No, I mean it's interesting, right? How do we come up with a kind of historically themed something based upon history that is then put into a game where anything can happen? So going through some of the both the Civ 6 names for stuff, as well as the kind of historical objectives that you've got out here. It's always interesting to see where we've just kind of grabbed whatever names are available. You know, the name of the battleship for Brazil, for instance, or the battle for Zulu. And then what does that then? What kind of meaning do we get out of that? What kind of game meaning do we get out of that? That's always a challenge. And so, what you've done here is not that dissimilar from what we have to do at Firaxis, which is, kind of you have this historical narrative that panned out a certain way and in its very specific locations and specific places. And then, how do we make that into a game? The thing that I noticed is with Korea, there is Korea as the science civ.
Hmm.
That is actually kind of an artifact of the Civ design, where Korea becomes the science powerhouse. Historically, it's more complicated than that. You have a period of time where they're doing really interesting things with movable type. They've got in the Goryeo dynasty and around sort of the middle of the first millennium, you've got kind of not a printing press, but movable type. And that's pretty cool. There's a lot of really interesting inventions. There's a lot of experimentation with language and things like that. But it's also not exactly the same situation that brings about scientific revolutions elsewhere. So it's Korea as the science powerhouse, and then drawing from that kind of historical background to make it a science powerhouse is also interesting because it makes you see kind of how complicated science is. When I think of a historical science powerhouse, I think of like Abbasid
Mhm.
or the Middle East. And it's interesting how Korea becomes the stand-in for that, and also under a leader who is not really known for that. He's more known for religious kinds of things. Um,
Yeah, and just for the chat to reminder, so my historical objectives for Korea, I have one that's called Three Kingdoms, which is settle three cities by the end of the ancient era. Leader in science and technology, have the highest science return by the end of the classical era, and then the last one is called Repel the invaders, have a Hachua kill 5 units, um, so at some point during the game.
yeah.
So that's where the leader in science technology comes from, because you're right. I chose that because gamifying the objective.
Mhm.
Korea is known as like the science civ in the game, or one of the science civs in the game. So that's why I wanted to play off that take. But I did, when I was doing my admittedly cursory research, found it difficult to find out where that kind of reputation came from 100%.
Yeah,
But
I think it comes a little bit from the design. Oh, and the other one that I thought was interesting is for Colombia. Um, you're hinting a little bit at the conflicts that the especially interpersonal conflicts that lead to Colombia. That's one thing that Civ can't really replicate because whatever your units are, you have one entity behind all the things they do, which is the player. But really, within Colombian history, especially those few years, you have all these different philosophies of what should be, all these different fights between different enormous personalities, and that's one thing we try to do with the design of Colombia is have a focus on all of these very different kinds of people who came together to make and then eventually to break Gran Colombia. But you had something in there that was I forget the exact
yeah, so
objective.
for everyone's reminder, my objectives are the first one is struggle between centralism and regionalism.
That's it.
And the way I gamified it was have one time during the game go back to a government you previously had to cause anarchy. So do that on purpose to cause anarchy. Liberate New Granada, which is kill 3 Spanish units. And then finding friends is hard. Have another player join you in a joint war on a different player. And just a background on that, that was just that when Gran Colombia was formed, there wasn't anyone who recognized it when it first formed
Mhm.
as a unitary state. So that's why I used that as one of the objectives.
I
Yeah.
mean, I have a question going to this. I'm wondering where the roster for the civs come from. Is it that the development team says, okay, we need a science civ. Who should we pick? Or is it, well, what can we do with Korea? Can we make Korea into science? Do you know what I mean? What comes first here?
It's it's the latter. So really what happens is we think about where would we be, you know, really missing something if we did not have this particular historical thing, this particular historical entity in the game. How bad would it be to have, you know, no China or no Korea or no Ottomans or something like that? And then once you kind of have a map of global influential powers, then you kind of think about regionally. Okay, so South Asia, what's going on? Southeast Asia, what's going on? Central Asia, what's going on? What are the big regional powers here? And then you kind of get this list, and that's worked out kind of with design. Um, and then design then starts to think about, well, okay, I so the historians would make like a overview of what's going on in like Korea or something like this. The major trends, the major movements, and then just drop it in front of one of the deciders who then would think about, could we make this, is there a scientific angle here? Is there a cultural angle here? And then, oh my God, we have everything is cultural. Could we tweak one of these? That might be a back and forth. Is there a way we can get one of these civs to be more scientific? And then so that may be where some of the retconning comes in. Is you say, okay, so we really need a scientific Civ. What would that look like? And with something like science, it's difficult, especially in Civ 6. It's really difficult because what is science? What is astronomy for the Maya?
Mhm.
It's not exactly. I mean, it is math. It is calculation. What's the purpose, though? Is to discover what the gods are doing, discover what is coming in the future. So
Destiny.
yeah, of course, and it blurs the lines between what we think of as scientific, a secular scientific thought, and religious thought. But those lines have been blurred for longer than they've been unblurred.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's like the game does a really good job of creating that blur of like a science kind of country, but like they also have that's like intrinsically a part of like their religion, their way of life. And I find that Civ does that really well. Like encaptures that with like choosing your sacred side or whatever. But yeah, I find that they do that really well.
And just like a small follow-up question, do you ever go through the forums and sit and pull out ideas from there? Because I know people ask for certain civs all the time, and sometimes we see them, sometimes we don't. Or do you try to not let them influence you and bully you into picking civs?
I read the forums, and I think there are, I think many, I'm going to say most people on the team do look at forums, but they're, the time frame isn't quite right because by the time something is being talked about on the forums, it's already in. It's already, being
Mm.
deeply under development. So it's there usually if something comes up on the forums, it's way past the time that we could add something in. There is the story of Tamar of Georgia that I wasn't at Firaxis at that time. Um, and so I don't know uh, the truth in it, but it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy where if the forums decide that we really want this character or this country or this person, and they say, okay, well, we really need this, then it creates a desire. Then you think, well, okay, they'll be really happy with this if we put it out. Um, but that's yeah, usually the forums are a little late for to get things underway.
Do you ever see things in forums and you're like, oh crap, I should have thought of that?
If I did, I wouldn't
Yeah.
admit it.
Okay. Okay. That's fair.
This is where you have to say, yeah, my entire, everything, my life is based off the forums to make the people on the forums happy. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a I love Civ Fanatics shirt on. I have R Civ, tattooed on the back of my neck. Absolutely.
Wow.
As we
That's
all
dedication to the
do.
forums.
Someone in the chat, someone clip that for the Civ subreddit. um,
I
uh,
also have a question from Ursa Ryan, who's playing today. He wanted to know about the great people in Civ 6. And I'm curious as well, are they the leaders that didn't make the cut when you were designing Civ 6? Although I believe you joined later. But where do those great people come from? Were they already deeply researched and then you just couldn't fit them in? Or were they designed primarily as great people? And then I know in Civ 7, Amina is a leader, but in Civ 6, she's a great
Yeah.
person. So are we also going to, is there any hints you can give us? Should we look through the list to get some clues for Civ 7?
I mean, yeah, there is a overlap a little bit in those pools of people, but also it's kind of an overlap of just significant and notable people. So if we want a scientist, we want a science focused leader, something like that, we might look back at great scientists. We may make an entirely new list that has nothing to do with Civ 6. And as it turns out, there's overlaps anyway, because because those historical figures were there before too. So yeah, I can think between great people, it's not that we go to the great people list to get ideas for leaders. Rather, a name will come up twice, and then somebody will be like, "Oh wait, that person was a leader in six." And then there's also a thought of, "Hey, this name is not going to be entirely random for a lot of the fans." So there's an idea about, okay, so this is somebody that the fans know, and this is an old favorite. There's the idea of, oh, this is somebody entirely new that they might get excited about, and leaders are kind of in the gray area in between. They may have seen the name, but they won't have seen the full motion capture voiced leader.
Mm.
I am curious what you feel about because I know that your specialization is in the Southeast Asia. About my objectives for Vietnam, that was one of the ones I found pretty tough to come up with.
Yeah, so it's kind of another repel the invaders one, right?
Yeah.
And what are the others?
So one is Defender of the Homeland, which is never lose a city. And then the other one is Legacy of the Trunk Sisters. Lead at least one successful war where you liberate a previously conquered city. Could be yours or another Civ's.
Yeah, I had to see. I went through and balanced all of them. Like Nystagmus was like the history consultant, and I was like almost the game balance consultant for this. And Vietnam Spawn was way too good, so I was like, so that second one was actually just added in by me quickly the other day. So it might be completely historically wrong, but like I'll take the blame for that.
No, it's I mean, it's complicated. Vietnamese history there is complicated as well because you've got two things going on, really. On one hand, you have this constant attempts to both control and also assimilate these movements coming in at first, mostly from China. There's a brief French interlude there, and a bit of an American interlude as well. But you get this constant struggle between Vietnam, especially northern Vietnam, and China, where different Chinese dynasties would come in, take over the area, control, kind of get people to begin using Chinese language, Chinese culture, these sorts of things like that, and then rebellions by different groups. So the Dongchak, for instance, is an interesting figure in that she's of a different ethnicity than present day Vietnamese. And it kind of she reflects that sort of polyethnic Southeast Asia oriented thing that was there before, whereas present day Vietnam is a much more syncretized fusion of Chinese culture and then what was there before. But you also at the same time in Vietnamese history you get this movement towards the south. You get this same process coming out of the north, going into lands that are dominated by the Champa people, or the Khmer, the Cambodians in the Mekong Delta there. So you get both an expansionist civ and a defensive civ. So Vietnam as the turtle civ makes sense for half of Vietnamese history. Vietnam as the expansionist would be the other half.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
really
we'll see what Carl does in this game. I have a feeling it might be the expansionist side, but you never know.
Yeah, how is Sassy going with Vietnam at the moment?
You have a look on the stream right now. There is peace in our time between the two, but I have a feeling that won't last for that long.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
one of
it
the
I'm pretty
has-
sure
Things.
Sassy's objective is to attack Carl because I handed them out. Let me just remind myself what it is. I've got so many windows up right now. It's almost impossible to find it.
So Sassy is surprise attack a nearby player and pillage at least 3 tiles, but do not take any cities.
No, that's the previous one. The current one is
Oh,
why save it when you can raise it? Raise at
yeah.
least 2 cities. and obviously Vietnam's objective is to never ever lose a city. So they that's what I've been trying to do is give them contrasting objectives like that, so they have to only one can win.
Yeah, I guess you guys kind of had to balance it out between, because if you knew who was on each other's border, given that it's a historically accurate map, did you have to think of like how to balance those out? How they would
Um,
interplay?
Yeah, exactly. We had to think about the interaction with all other players. That's actually why we were saying
Mm.
earlier, well, we put Peppermint Butler as Dido in the very center of the map,
Yeah.
just because I wanted him. He's got a history of it. I don't know him personally that well, but I do know every single person he meets who plays with him says he's a crazy warmonger. So I was like, we've got to have him in the middle. And of course, he's already had a massive battle with Ursa. But you had to think about interaction between the two of them, but also about the quality of their spawn. So, for example, a really good spawn like America, who's completely uncontested, has got some very, very difficult objectives. And Nystagmus can read those to you right now, actually, if you want.
Yeah, so for America, their historical objectives, the first one is called the Transcontinental Railroad. So they have to build a railroad between a city. Now, White Nerdy asked me this in the DM. He doesn't want to name them New York City, LA, Seattle, or New Orleans. He wants to name them other things. So I was like, that's
That's not-
fine as long as they're in the area where those cities actually exist.
Yeah.
And you have to connect them all with a railroad. Um, the second one is Manifest Destiny. No other Civ can have more than 2 cities in North America. Um, we have another one called Melting Pot.
Mm.
Recruit at least one great person type. 5 points if you get every one type at 1 point by the end of the medieval era. And then the very last one for the modern is Cold War superpower. Be the first Civ to complete the Manhattan Project and build at least 1 nuke.
Those are
Okay.
difficult. Yeah, good luck. White
I'll
Nerdy.
apologize again. Initially, if you want a sneak peek, initially it was just the Transcontinental Railroad, all 20 points. And I came in, I was
Oh
like,
wow.
you have the best spawn, you can't also have the easiest objective. So I just added some extra ones on that are probably, again, maybe not history, PhD level, but
They
hopefully
are
make the game
definitely
interesting.
historical, and
Yeah,
I
they're
think it's
historical. I'll take
actually
that.
they definitely are.
Now that
They're
the fact that Roman Holiday is volunteering that he did that, so I don't know if you noticed, I did change some of them around Roman Holiday because I came in and saw that.
Oh,
And
okay, good. That's
there was
been
one
improved.
particular one that struck me. So for Phoenicia, when you
Yeah.
wanted him to take cities, you said you called it colonial ambitions, and I changed that because
Ooh.
colonialism is a very specific um, socioeconomic phenomenon to the pre-modern and modern world, not from antiquity. It's very specific to that, and so that's why I changed. I know what you were going with, and so I changed it around to make it more historically accurate.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. An
Yeah.
AI wrote that, not me. So that was just a draft.
No,
I
don't
I
say that
apologize.
to me.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Wait, seriously? Did an AI write that?
I asked an AI to come up with objective names for
This
that
is why you don't
particular
let
one.
AI do history.
Yeah, no, it was just a draft. It wasn't supposed to be there.
This became roasting
The Stan was
Roman.
exposing me. Welcome back to expose Roman Holiday.
Well,
Yeah.
you were volunteering that you were making changes, and I decided to tell you that's the one
You
I
didn't
saw.
need
That
to
was like,
volunteer
nope.
the AI
I didn't
info.
have to volunteer me. You have to expose me in that sense.
This would have been so hard to like cover the entire history of your civilization and come up with like the different challenges based off that, because you can see that within America you have the Transcontinental Railroad. Manifest Destiny is like quite, uh it's like about a white America, and where uh I'm sorry, it's so early in the morning. Words are not coming to my head this morning.
These terms are
But
obviously, yeah. Like what you're getting at is that these terms are obviously very loaded,
Yes.
and we are kind of
Yes.
gamifying them a little bit. And I do recognize that the one with the colonialism, I definitely didn't want to be that name there.
Yeah,
And so
no, but
yeah,
also
and
like you have Manifest Destiny, and then you have like Melting Pot. The melting pot of America is built off the immigration of people coming into
mhm.
America and the different people that have
Yeah,
contributed to
exactly.
America.
Yeah.
Even the Transcontinental Railroad was built by the Chinese laborers that were that they went and got to come to their country to build their railroads, and the same happened in Canada. Like, it's so interesting to see like how you've like fleshed out these challenges, and you do really kind of see the gamification of history. And like, yes, there's this Manifest Destiny that is like occurring, the push to the West, like within America, but also you do have this melting pot that is happening as well. So I think you've done a pretty good job with America. It's just
Oh,
like it would have
thank
been
you.
so hard for you to do this for every country because, and I think that the Civ historians probably have the same issue, is like you're encompassing such a large history. I think maybe with Civ 7, it's maybe a little bit easier for you guys because you have like the different ages now. But like I can see like going from Brazil and then to Korea, like it's either a large amount of history that you can cover, or there's only like a very specific amount of time that's being covered by these
And
challenges. So,
Right. And
yeah,
I
and
as
Andrew Johnson and I, Dr. Johnson and I were chatting actually a little bit before this, and that was one of the concerns I had when I was coming up with them is, on one end you have, and we did talk about like the problem with or the perception of continuity when it may not necessarily be there. But you do deal with like some states like Grand Columbia that was around for about 2 decades. And then
mm,
you have other civs. I don't really know the proper term for this because, if you say
yeah,
Vietnam, do you mean like the kingdom? Do you mean the nation
yes.
state? Do you mean that kind of stuff, right? So there's these different breaks that occur where, and I think one of the good examples of this would be China, which is not being played in the game, unfortunately. But they usually arrange a lot of their history in dynasties that are meant to portray continuity despite the changing political climate.
Mm,
And so that's like one of the things that's difficult with Civ to begin with, because a Civ is a Civ, but it's really this umbrella term that just encompasses such a long period of time, and that's what was hard for me to figure out what was important for the historical part, and
mm.
then also, well, is it possible in the game? Can the game like portray this in a way that I can be happy with?
Yeah, and I want to
Paisley
ask,
was
yeah,
asking, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Dr. Johnson, like, do you have these conversations? I assume you do,
Mm,
but what do they look like in the back room and discussing things like Manifest Destiny, some more controversial historical things that did happen, but maybe you might think for or second guess if you want to add it into a game and make it into a like a gamified objective. So, like, what are the conversations going on at Firaxis around these?
Absolutely, and that's a constant conversation of
yeah.
what do we do about X or Y issue? What do we do about indigenous civs? What do we do about colonialism? What do we do about slavery? What do we do about things like like Manifest Destiny? Um, and I think one of the things that comes to mind, well, with some of the, at least with the Shawnee stuff, we had we had constant contact with the tribe, and we could say, hey, how does this feel? How does that feel? What if we did it like this? What if we did it like that? So we were able to get like a constant back and forth, getting suggestions from them and kind of bouncing ideas off of them. But with something like Manifest Destiny, look at the way the game functions. You have a giant blank space on the map, and then it is the goal of your game to make yield numbers go up. Now, we might think that the world that way of thinking made, the kind of Lockean, I put labor into the land and get yields out, and I expand and I grow and I prosper, that has created, problematic parts of history, but that kind of expansion is deeply embedded in just the way that a 4X game works. Something like slavery, I think, is not. It's not necessary to the function of the game. So
Mm,
that one question, is it necessary? The second question is, does it continue to cause lasting harm? And I think with many figures and issues, we can say, okay, somebody is going to see this in the game and really not feel good about it. If Genghis Khan pops up in the game, it doesn't like, there's no protests that are
and
gonna erupt.
Yeah,
as
as a
distant.
Persian, it's okay. You can include him.
Yeah.
Okay, but there's certain other figures that will go unmentioned that continue, their legacy continues to cause lingering ill feelings. And so it actually is very interesting, especially with 6, where you have certain where leaders are tied directly to civilizations. Oftentimes, the leaders you come up with are nationalist figures, and so the idea of, okay, this person is the heart and soul of this particular place. Oftentimes, those figures that are paraded out as that have been used to enforce systems of power or systems of domination in ways that continue to not feel good in the present. So that's it also requires a little bit of research. Haile Selassie is that a figure, if we're talking about designing Ethiopia back in Civ 6, is that a figure that feels badly if you're Tigray? Is that an issue that people in Sparks, Maryland, are familiar with? Should they be familiar with? These are the kinds of conversations that we might have, and it also involves a lot of learning on my part too. Like, I have a specific focus in the world, but working with Firaxis means that I need to figure out what's going on in Africa and South America, in many places that I don't have a background in.
It would be pretty hard to not fall into like that nationalist like perspective, like mindset when you're designing a civilization. And you kind of like have to choose your leader, and they are a symbol of sorts for that civilization in the game.
Yeah.
So I can see that that would be very difficult to do that. And there's a certain sensitivity that you have to bring to history in gaming that yeah, you would constantly have to think of like the sensitivity of it for people, for your audience.
That's one question I get a lot about 7 is like, hey, you as an academic, don't you really hate this disambiguation of the leaders and the civs or something like that? And it's I think the idea that many people have is that history is about telling the grand story of the X or Y people. And it's not that. History, I mean, Paisley can comment on this as well, but like, it's a look at processes. It's a look at a web of imperfect and partial connections that changes in the way that a crystal changes if you move one piece of it. So it is not about essences. But I think a lot of times pop history is about essences. And the expectation that a historical immersion or like a historian would be really interested in promoting essences and bringing essences out is oftentimes misdirected. That's I'm interested in processes and interconnections, and less so with thousands of years old essences.
Now, I'm sorry to have to cut off. I know the casters, there's a lot going on in the game. I was just watching it. They want to probably catch up on.
Yeah,
However, the
definitely.
conversation doesn't have to end. I know that Paisley Trees is also streaming, and so if I can move everybody into the interview channel, if we all want to still continue talking while the casters catch up on the game, and then I will throw up a link to Paisley Trees stream on YouTube in the chat. If anyone wants to join and follow up on that conversation as it continues, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, I'm
Great.
happy to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you
great.
so
Thank
much.
you.
I'll be joining you into the interview segment, but you guys have your work cut out on spot in Roman Holiday. I was just watching the game. There's a lot of stuff that just happened. So
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Chat was asking a lot.
sorry. Hey, sorry about that. I didn't mean to cut off too soon. It's just I know that
No.
That's
It's
okay.
production. It's how it goes. Yeah.
We could talk for a long time.
Yes.
I did share the link to the to Paisley Trees' stream, and you can use this channel. I may come in and out if you all want to still continue talking. Feel free. You are guests, and so just let me know if you need anything. But I'll be kind of in and out because I'm doing a lot of the stuff back in the scenes.
Yes, I'm streaming and I have it on the Discord page, so you can turn on your cameras if you'd like. And of
Okay.
course, I don't want to take up too much of your time, Sophie and Dr. Johnson. So please let me know as soon as you have to go. But I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's really interesting to get a look behind the scenes, definitely.
It really is.
Thanks. Okay, so I go to your Discord,
We're
Yeah,
already on. It's already on.
Paisley.
No, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just turn on your mic now. It's all connected.
Oh,
Or your video. Yes, we're already in the right room. Nystagmus pushed us in.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I just randomly did that. Yeah. So, but yeah, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that it's been a pretty hectic day overall here on the Civgive. And so I do know that we kind of changed things around about how it was supposed to be done, but I thank
it's
everybody
a
for
big
their
day.
I thank everyone for their flexibility for this as well. And it was a very interesting conversation. I always love chatting with Dr. Andrew Johnson, all the time. Do you prefer if I call you Dr. Andrew Johnson? I always get,
Doctor.
yeah,
I think it's funny. So yeah, working in
nice.
Scandinavia, nobody calls you doctor,
yeah.
and like also like at Firaxis, nobody calls me doctor,
They
and
don't.
then no, and, yeah, hanging out with my friends, they should call me doctor.
They do. Yes, they do call you doctor.
So it's
Yeah, it's definitely a cultural
fine.
thing because, a lot of my professors are from either Iran, so we call them Ustad, or they're from Turkey, we
Yeah.
call them Hojam. You have to use a proper title for your
Yeah.
professors. You can't just call them Drew.
Hey,
Yeah,
Drew.
My Thai students would call me Atan, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. In
Exactly.
Yeah.
Australia, we'd be like, "Hey, Drew, how's it going?"
For myself, the reason why I keep switching between the two is it's actually just from the different interactions I've had. So I'm a in case just to kind of know, I'm a physician in behind my streamer gamer tag, and all my colleagues, because I was I just came out of residency and I'm just so used to calling everyone doctor, and then a bunch of them gave me a ribbing for doing that, and so I keep switching between the two because I'm never sure what the person would prefer. So that's where
It's
it
like
comes from.
it's like being an X-Man, So it's like in certain contexts you have your like fight name, and then in other contexts, but if you're just hanging out, then it's Logan or something. So you
Yeah,
can
Yes.
who calls Professor X like by his first name or Magneto by his first name? It's only like really just Professor X and Magneto, right? Or the only
Professor
ones.
X. I mean, we're both professors, so I would call
Yeah.
him Chuck, and he can call me Drew.
Yeah. Camaraderie.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But going off of what you were talking about, Dr. Johnson, I'm curious if like when you came into Civ, and you came halfway through Civ 6, right? Or were
I
you there at the
came in.
beginning?
No. I was the advisor for Indonesia and Khmer, and then I came in as first New Frontiers Pass
Right.
was gearing up. So like, let's see, I wrote all the unvoiced lines for New Frontiers Pass. I wrote, and then I think I was on the voice acting stream for those leaders. So like I didn't advise on the design
Right.
of New Frontiers Pass,
Mm.
but and then Leader Pass was I was the historian there, not the designer, but the historian on that, and then Civ 7.
Right. So I'm curious if like you came in and you thought, well, as a historian, I would love to change this aspect of the game, but you recognize like because it's a game, or like the constraints of the medium of the game, there's some things that you just can't change even though you would love to.
I got into academia from gaming, really, because when I was, when I was just out of being able to read for the first time, I took all my brother's Dungeons and Dragons books and just devour them as a kid. And so
Mhm.
I started tabletop gaming from a very young age. And I would just sit down and design worlds. And then as I when I went to college, I realized that there are more interesting worlds than any fantasy writer can come up with. And so I got really interested in that. But I coming into gaming, into kind of the game development stuff, you see how just how both that it has to work as a game too, and that is fundamental. Now there's many things that that I would want to move around, I would want to tweak, many things I want to flesh out a little bit more. Definitely I you know when you first drop into a place, there are things that you thought, oh man, I wish I could have designed that differently, or that person is not really hitting right for me. But there's just so much to do looking
Right.
forward that looking backwards is impossible.
You kind of have to look through, like, because from my perspective, looking at like looking at historical games, I really struggle between seeing them as like two lenses, like looking them from a game perspective or the historical perspective. And I do see like that kind of push and pull with a lot of developers between the history side and the gamification of history. And
Yeah.
I can see where certain choices have been made, and I understand like the game side of things. Like you need to make it work. And like, but at the same time, as with my historical background, you really need that sensitivity, because I've seen atrocious games in my like past 3 years. Atrocious. No historical research has gone into some games, and it really shows you like what popular history looks like in the public eye, like what people are see like their yeah, it's really fascinating to see how history is being represented in games these days. And I find that Civilization is so refreshing because you do have a sensitivity, but it is a quite a popular game, and it has this
Right.
history. So you really have to uphold that, like that it is an art. It is a 4X game. You have the expansion policies and you really uphold those, but you have to have that sensitivity. I find that Civ do that with their game, um,
Right. And so
to a
it's
point.
Yeah,
like, as a teacher, what do you want to teach people through a game like Civ?
Mm,
this is my hidden agenda. You're getting onto my secret
yes.
agenda here. Which is that yes, I feel that more than being a teacher, I think what I feel, what I want to do with my life, right, is I want to be a storyteller. And I think teaching is a good way to get that, to get kind of stories that alter our perceptions of the world in. If I was a better writer, I would be a novelist or something like this. Um, and games, I also want to, yeah, I want to impart something. And essentially what I want to impart is that the world is a lot stranger than what we think it is, or the world, or rather, the world as we understand it, as we conceive of it, is only one possibility. And if we have to be able to adapt ourselves to seeing the world, to seeing outside of the things that we think that we know, um, if we're going to adapt, because our current way of configuring things
Mhm.
looks like it's going to end up killing us. So we need to be able to think about new things. We need to be able to think about things differently. So that's my hidden agenda. Is I kind of want to I want to explore for myself and bring other people into kind of new ways of conceiving the world. Games are a little weird in that there is an architecture behind the scenes, which is the code. Um,
Right.
and so you're limited by that, but with design you can kind of play with that a little bit. And there's many historical games that I love. I absolutely love many of our competitors games. um, and sometimes they get things so right and it feels so good, and like, oh my god, this one figure died of like dysentery, and now an entire empire is fragmented into a million bits, and all brothers are fighting brothers, and that feels so right.
Mhm.
And then there are other parts where it doesn't get like Southeast Asian court politics is not something that those
Mm,
games get
Right.
very well,
it's true.
but it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Mm,
kind of double-edged sword here because also what you put out into the world becomes people's vision of history or understanding of history. I'm sure not everyone is
Absolutely.
the amount of people you reach through Civ is probably way more than we will ever reach through our dissertations, right? So, I mean, there's a lot going into it. And I mean, like,
There's multiple zeros behind the amount of copies sold, Civ, and then the
mm.
amount of people who bought my book. Like, it is like not 100, not 1,000. It is tens. It's not a billion, but it's the order of magnitude is something like
right.
that.
Do you
It's
ever
like an
worry about that?
sorry.
Like, sorry, go ahead, Sophie.
No, 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 you go.
I mean, I guess I was just thinking about Spain in Civ 7. I know you can't talk about Civ 7 too much, but I'll just say, like, for me, their design is really around their conquest. And so, for example, the conquistadors are in the game. We've got Christopher Columbus in the game. And, so what we're putting out there for the world about Spain is this really complicated history at their quote unquote height. And this
Mm,
comes into the world and it gets reified. So Spain once again becomes known as this Civ. Whereas, like, for example, I mean, we could also think about Spain as a place of flourishing art, Picasso, Goya, and think about them even in the modern age. So I'm curious, like, do you ever struggle with what you're putting out there in the world? And if that's something you think about.
Yeah, that is really true. Um, and I think when so we have to balance, we'll say three things. On one hand is the narrative that we might want to put out, um, the narrative that fans expect, and the narrative that works well with design.
Right.
That makes for
mm,
a fun game.
Yeah.
So if we can get two victories, if like two things are in sync, then that thing usually beats the third thing. So I mean, for me looking into Spain, you've got the New World, you've also got the Reconquista, and you've got the Inquisition. So it was what really to pick was a little bit rough.
I,
But yes, going into the era of arts would have been something had there been, and that again gets to that question of like, okay, do we need a cultural civ? Do we need a scientific civ? Do we need an exploration civ?
Mhm.
mm,
Yeah, and I could see fans getting upset about their sort of being misdirected because they expect Spain to be this conquesting civilization. And to come out without that, I could see a lot of people being confused and maybe turned off. So I forgot, yes, you also have to think about what are expectations of a certain civilization.
And you can challenge those, right? You can push back against expectations.
yeah.
Obviously you get pushback when you do that. Um, but that so you have to, in a way, pick your fights, and you can't pick all the fights. And I think the academic in me wants to pick all the fights. Um, but I am probably the least pragmatic person around the Firaxis office when it comes to to that.
Mhm.
I want to pick all the fights. And then there's tons of people there to be like, hey, no, 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 we're not doing this. And
I think that like the game, it's like accessible history. I don't think a lot of people are actually like taking their gameplay as like, okay, this is history. And I understand like that games like the representation of a like Spain, for example, can like have an impression on someone. But I find that a lot of games also inspire curiosity in gamers to go and we've probably experienced this as well, where we've gone and like done further research into something, and even just like representing Spain as an like a conquesting kind of civ, and like with the conquistadors, like yes, that's a really rough part of history, but it also did have a big impact on our world, and to like represent that in the game, like I understand that we are playing it and we are making the decisions to expand and use that as like a positive ability within the game, but it really is the reality of Spain as well, which is good, I find, to show people, and then they can like kind of use that as a launching pad to be like, okay, so conquistadors, what were they getting up to in the world? And I
There's
mean,
a yes
it's
and no to
yeah.
that. I think there is this yes, that ideally you would, and I think this is especially true when you bring up something that few people in the audience is really are really know about. So like Mojpite, right? The medieval Indonesia, the early modern Indonesia. Um, I I think that's great to be uh, specifically calling out that one dynasty. So then people are like, "Hey, what's this? Maybe we'll look into it." But
Mm,
on the other hand, you are right in that it forms the backdrop. What we put out also forms a little bit of the backdrop. When I think about like what did the Hanging Gardens look like?
mm.
Whatever we're talking about, whatever the historical referent or non-referent is for that. But when I go back into my young adult brain, the image that I get oftentimes is going to be from Civ 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so my brain already has earlier versions of Civ down as a template for
Mm,
what does history look like. So there's a responsibility there to
yeah.
get it right. And and that means uh when we do slip up or something like that, or get a detail wrong, like yeah, I'm kicking myself for weeks on that because I realize you've got a generation of people who are gonna have something not quite right in the back of their brains.
But I mean, for me, it's
It's
great
true.
because it gives me my video material. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
thank you.
It is your role to do that. It is my role to do this. This is fine. This is, like night and day, like, fire and ice. These are two primal forces of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, I had a question about the models that you create, like the wonders and the architecture. As an architectural historian, I'm so fascinated by those. And I'm curious, do they start with the art team first, or do you begin together with the historians? Like, how do you begin to imagine the Hanging Gardens? Is it them or is it you? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So that process has gotten see what can I talk about with that? I'm trying to think about NDA stuff right here.
Yes.
But like we've gotten a good process going. Early days is always a bit like a flood. So um but how it might happen is, art will write to the historians and be like, hey, okay, so we're gonna work on this thing. And then historians are like, okay, so here's some reference. Then art's like, hey, what about this reference? What about that? Back and forth as much as time allows. And then then it goes to art, and then they say, okay, this is what we got. And then we say, hey, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, or can you do this? So it's a long back and forth through multiple stages. Um, yeah, but most of that is in the hands of art. I think in terms of us, so we have that back and forth with art. And then with the like design, we got a similar back and forth with design. The things that are really in our hands would be the narrative system. Well, that's also that's the team that the two historians are in is in the narrative team. And then there's the Civilopedia is definitely like
Right.
within historians. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I mean, I check the Reddit and the models and the wonders, those are where people expect a lot of accuracy from, which is so interesting because it's one of the hardest things to get accurate as well. We don't know what a lot of these things look like,
Yeah,
and then you're
true.
limited to one tile. So I mean, what do you think about this drive for historical accuracy in a game? Is this even something we want?
Yeah, it's aspirational, right? And maybe it's not able to be achieved perfectly, but it's aspirational. And I think you're absolutely right. Okay, so it has to be one tile. It has to be it has to pop. It
Has to
has
be
to
pretty.
jump out. It has to be pretty. It has to be distinct from not other tiles around there, other buildings. So there are a lot of constraints around already what you want out of a wonder on a tile. Where is I going with this?
The accuracy, but then
Yeah, the accuracy, right, right. And then I think again, like what many of the especially the fans who are really into history, the Wikipedia historians, if like as a category, is that they expect there is an answer out there somewhere.
Mhm.
You're
Mm,
gonna be in a dusty library flipping pages, and here is a photograph of the Hanging Gardens. All right, we can take that and put that in, and it's just as a
yeah.
matter that we didn't look hard enough to get it. And that's not true, obviously. So there is a lot of creativity that goes along with the imagining, especially things that aren't there. Creativity with, you know, 25 other wonders in the pipeline and you know, a limited time frame as well. So yeah, that's a constant thing.
Right.
I think what is nice about the game Civ is that you kind of get a feeling for the complexity of history in your own gameplay. Like when you play as your Civ, you can make changes, actively make changes, like al- alternate it to history, and you kind of get. But then, am I maybe thinking too academically when I play my game, like from that lens? I'm like, oh, like, look at the complexity within my game right now, like of this history right here. Oh, I'm being so anti-history right now. But yeah, I think that people could get a feel for the complexity of history, just the way that you can play out the way that civs interact with each other.
Yeah,
Um,
there's there's simulations and there's games,
mm,
right? And
Yes.
um I think with Civ it's a game.
yeah.
You have a starting position on board, everybody's equal, everybody's balanced out to be equal, and you move your positions in order to get something. So when I'm playing Civ, I don't actually go for any kind of historical reconstruction, although I
Mm,
do role play a little bit.
yeah.
Um, but I don't. Whereas if I'm playing a game that is more um, a simulation, then I'm really into that what
Mm,
if. Okay, so we're gonna be the you know we're gonna be indigenous North America and try to remain independent in like
mm,
1823 or something like this. Like that would be like um of kind of more of a simulation goal in a
Right.
game.
Right.
mm.
I do have another question from my community. They were wondering about the system of the leader agendas, abilities, things like that, because that's really one of the fun parts for historians to sink their teeth into is what does this mean? Where does it come from? What would we have picked? And I'm curious, like, what's the fun parts of picking these terms for you? What are the challenges? And what are you trying to like achieve with the terms that you pick? I assume you pick all of them, right? Not any other team?
No. That's also design. So
Okay.
oftentimes, sometimes that'll be entirely design. Sometimes the design will ask myself or the other historian about these things. Sometimes they'll bounce things off my head. But if I've given them an overview, I'll give some suggestions for like, hey, there's this, and this, and then they might pick from that. They might uh, most of the designers have their own um, passions for a particular time or place, so they might pick one of those things. So that isn't always coming from historians. Also, when you're talking about Civ 6, there's no historian there
Right.
until me. So there is no then it's entirely design. Um, so that's those names are coming from that interplay between design and me, or design and the historians, the back and forth there. Um, and then there's a challenge in how to make things unique. So if we compare kind of strategies of rule or something like that, or strategies of production, or cultural policies or something like that. Sometimes there's not information. Sometimes there's strategies that just look really similar to
Mhm.
everything else. I mean, how many different ways can we say organized, professional army? Um, and what makes this professional army in antiquities different from that professional army in antiquity, and if we both have the same thing, are they really unique? So if we that becomes a little bit of a challenge, and sometimes you hide a what might be a historical similarity behind a particular name. Sometimes it's just a
Interesting.
reference to um, the history itself. So I think Zulu, for instance, because I was looking into some of the Civ 6 things, Zulu again, which was entirely designed. They've got references to the Zulu regiments, um, which that really would be a unique unit, right? If it's like the Zulu infantry,
Mhm.
not the Impi, but the later Zulu infantry. But the unique unit's already done, and so here we need a word for something militaristic in
Right.
Zulu.
Okay.
Okay,
That's
we're gonna do that.
explained so much. Yes. It's true.
And sometimes, like, if you hit something that there's a passion for, then it's different. So I'll give you an example from Seven that I've talked about online before, so I think it's okay. Um, Chongsa has Van as her agenda, and which is civilization, which is the word for civilization in Vietnamese. Um, that is, I think there were some commenters online who were saying, well, that's not really appropriate to her time period because she is um, kind of resisting these civilizing forces that are using that term, not the term Van Ming, but the Chinese equivalent,
Mhm.
as assimilation. So the Chinese version of the Mission Civilisatrice, the kind of colonial agenda of let's take these people and turn them into models of ourselves. She's resisting that, and so however, I've used that word to be her agenda. My intention there, though, was to say, okay, so this is her act of resisting and saying, no, 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 we have civilization. We don't need yours.
Mhm.
And so it was in a way of referencing that, but all of these processes are beyond her time or after her time. So, but I thought that term captured that idea of resistance, of independence, of a defense of her own culture, because acculturation was a part of what she was fighting against. So that idea of no, we have our own customs, our own ways, and we're going to defend them, I thought could be encapsulated by using this term. Um, so that's an example of where I deliberately kind of selected, put a meaning into a particular term
Hmm.
to give it a message or a feel.
Right. I love it. It's like little clues that those of us interested in history can follow up on and search deeper about. I was also doing that for like the two Mali leaders, so Mansa Musa and Sundiata. The terms for Sundiata, I like it revealed so much about Mali to me. So it's his mother's name, and then oh yes,
That was, yeah.
that was you, yes. And then but with
As
Mansa
leader passes,
Musa,
yeah.
exactly. With Mansa Musa, they were so generic that maybe it doesn't lead you the crumbs to find out more. But with Sundiata, you really find those crumbs and you can figure out how do these fit together. You find it's like a puzzle you're leaving for us, which is great. So thank you. Sophie, do you have any other last words?
I just find it so fascinating to hear like your like side of things, like the behind the scenes. And Paisley, you have like the most amazing questions. So I just it's such a privilege for me to just sit here and listen to you both. But thank you for having me here. That's it from me.
Thank you so much. I mean, you have such interesting perspectives as someone who plays games all the time and has so many games to
Yeah,
compare for us and give a
lots
window
lots of
into.
historical games.
Yeah, I mostly just play Civ, so I don't have that
Yeah.
perspective at all.
Oh, I've got so many to share with you. Don't worry. If you want to go into like critiquing other games, I've got some games for you.
I've
Civ
got
is the
my
least
eyes
of your
on
worries.
Civ.
Yeah.
And Dr. Johnson, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, I just really, I appreciate the Civgive. I also, Paisley, appreciate your comments and online as well, and also how because I think again, as somebody as an academic, you get used to blunt, honest, but well-meaning criticism, and that's what I really appreciate about your commenting on us
Mm,
and on what we do.
Thank you so much. Yes. I mean, it's all out of a place of trying to learn more together, not to critique
yeah,
and put
Absolutely,
down
yeah,
any team.
absolutely,
of
Yeah.
course.
no, yeah, and no, I really appreciate it, and yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you both so much. And thank you to Nystagmus and the Civgive team for putting this all together. It was such an enlightening experience to find out more behind the scenes. We're always curious about those. So thank you, chat, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
okay,
See you.
thanks.
Bye.